3 aircraft carrier strike groups, 2 marine assault ships, 10 destroyers, all positioned in the same stretch of ocean at the same time, aimed directly at Iran. This hasn't happened since the Iraq War began in 2003. This isn't a hypothetical buildup or a future possibility. According to naval tracking data confirmed just days ago, this is happening right now, and it represents one of the most significant American naval concentrations anywhere in the world in over 2 decades. Today, we're walking through exactly what this deployment actually consists of, why it represents such a dramatic shift in posture, and exactly what it signals about where this conflict with Iran might be heading next. To understand why this specific deployment is such a big deal, you need to understand what normal U.S. naval presence in this region actually looks like, because what's happening right now is anything but normal. According to reporting from the National, throughout most periods of relative calm, the United States typically maintains a single carrier strike group in the broader Middle East region, sometimes rotating between deployments, supplemented by a handful of destroyers and support vessels as part of the Navy's Fifth Fleet operations. That's the baseline. That's what routine presence in this part of the world usually looks like. What's currently deployed is nothing close to routine. According to USNI News, the authoritative source that tracks the exact positioning of every U.S. Navy carrier strike group and amphibious ready group in the entire world, as of July 20th, 2026, the United States has concentrated 3 separate carrier strike groups and 2 amphibious ready groups specifically under U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility, directly supporting the ongoing blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. According to that same reporting, this specific combination, 3 carrier strike groups operating together in the same regional command, marks the first time this level of concentrated naval power has been assembled in this way since the 2003 Iraq War. That's not a comparison being made loosely for dramatic effect. That's a direct, sourced comparison from naval analysts tracking exactly this kind of deployment pattern, identifying this as a genuine historical outlier, a shift from routine patrol posture to what's being described as high-intensity power projection. Let's actually break down what this force concentration means in practical terms, because the numbers alone don't fully capture the scale of what's being described here. According to reporting from the National, the specific composition of this deployment includes 3 full carrier strike groups, each one built around a massive nuclear-powered aircraft carrier carrying dozens of fighter jets, along with the escort ships, submarines, and support vessels that travel with it, combined with 10 additional destroyers and 2 marine assault ships specifically positioned to help enforce the ongoing blockade of the strait. According to that same reporting, this force includes the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. expected to be part of the carrier group directly blockading the strait, while separate reporting from Army recognition confirmed that the USS George H.W. Bush had also been deployed toward the region, spotted off the coast of South Africa as it made its way toward the Middle East, illustrating what officials described as a phased and deliberate buildup of combat power over the preceding months. This detail about the phased buildup is genuinely important to understand, because it tells you this wasn't some sudden, reactive decision made in response to a single incident. According to Army Recognition's reporting from April, American defense officials had already begun describing this as a rare tri-carrier deployment specifically designed to enhance American readiness to respond to simultaneous crises across the Red Sea, the Arabian Gulf, and the Eastern Mediterranean all at once, a level of reinforced deterrence typically associated with major contingency planning, rather than routine day-to-day military presence. In other words, American military planners had been building toward exactly this kind of concentrated force posture for months, well before the most recent round of escalation in mid-July that we've covered in previous videos. Let's talk about why the U.S. actually needs this much naval power specifically to deal with the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, because the reasoning behind it is genuinely fascinating from a military strategy perspective. According to reporting from the National, enforcing an effective blockade of this specific waterway requires an enormous range of intelligence and surveillance capability, everything from satellites to submarines, specifically to catch what naval experts describe as blockade runners, vessels attempting to slip past the blockade undetected. The reporting notes that American surveillance assets involved in this effort include E-2D Hawkeye early warning aircraft, AWACS radar planes, and P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, all working together to mark and track vessels attempting to cross a genuinely vast stretch of ocean. There's also a real and serious risk calculation behind why this level of force is considered necessary, rather than something smaller and more routine. According to that same national reporting, American warships operating close enough to intercept vessels in the Gulf of Oman face genuine exposure to Chinese-made shore-based anti-ship missiles that Iran has stockpiled specifically for exactly this kind of scenario, along with naval mines and mini-submarines that pose severe threats to any warship operating too close to Iran's own coastline. This is a genuinely important detail, because it explains why a smaller, more limited naval presence simply wouldn't be considered sufficient for this specific mission. Enforcing a blockade against a country that has spent years developing exactly the kind of asymmetric coastal defense capability designed to threaten larger, more expensive warships requires overwhelming force and layered defensive capability, precisely the kind of protection that only a concentration this large can realistically provide. According to a separate, more specifically military-focused analysis published by 1945, the tactical reality of operating inside the Strait of Hormuz itself is genuinely dangerous for any naval force, regardless of its overall size. That analysis noted that given the narrow size of the passageway and its close proximity to Iran's coastline, any U.S. Navy vessel operating there offers a large, visible, and potentially close-in target for Iranian-launched drones, missiles, or small boat swarms, without the kind of expansive defensive maneuvering room that American ships had available to them during earlier naval operations in the Red Sea. This detail genuinely helps explain the scale of the current deployment. If individual ships are operating in an unusually constrained, dangerous environment, surrounding them with the combined defensive and offensive capability of 3 full carrier strike groups and 10 additional destroyers provides layered protection and overwhelming response capability that a smaller force simply couldn't offer in this specific, uniquely dangerous waterway. Let's put some real numbers behind exactly what this concentrated force has already been doing, because the deployment itself is only part of the story. According to reporting from Army Recognition covering events from July 20th, U.S. Central Command executed its 9th consecutive night of strikes against Iranian command hubs, air defenses, and missile sites on that specific date, part of a sustained campaign specifically designed to degrade IRGC targeting networks, enforce the naval blockade, and restore commercial shipping through the strait. 9 consecutive nights of coordinated strikes represents an extraordinary operational tempo, the kind of sustained, relentless pressure that simply wouldn't be logistically possible without the kind of massive, concentrated naval and air power this deployment represents. According to the documented history of this specific naval blockade, tracked on Wikipedia, President Trump made a genuinely striking claim regarding the cumulative effectiveness of this sustained pressure, stating publicly that 158 vessels belonging to Iran's naval forces had been destroyed throughout the course of this campaign, leading him to assert that only small, high-speed attack boats remained operational within Iran's entire naval fleet. Whether that specific figure represents a fully precise accounting or a somewhat rounded, politically framed estimate, it reflects the scale of destruction this campaign has been able to inflict on Iran's conventional naval capability, using exactly the kind of concentrated carrier and destroyer power currently positioned in the region. It's worth pausing here to talk about what a claim like that actually means for the broader trajectory of this conflict, because losing that much of a conventional navy fundamentally changes what kind of threat Iran can realistically pose going forward. If the vast majority of Iran's larger, more capable naval vessels have genuinely been destroyed, leaving primarily small, fast attack boats as the remaining operational fleet, that shifts Iran's entire naval strategy toward exactly the kind of asymmetric, swarm-based tactics we've covered extensively in previous breakdowns of this conflict. Small boat attacks, drone strikes, and mine warfare, rather than any kind of traditional ship-to-ship naval engagement. This detail genuinely helps explain why the current deployment includes such an extensive combination of surveillance and layered defensive assets specifically, because defending against a swarm of small, fast, hard-to-detect boats requires a fundamentally different kind of naval posture than preparing for a conventional engagement against larger warships would. There's also a genuinely important economic and financial dimension to this entire deployment worth understanding, because it connects directly to why this level of military commitment is even being considered worthwhile in the first place. According to market analysis referenced in reporting on this deployment, financial markets are currently pricing in roughly a 23% likelihood of the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, another critical regional choke point connected to this broader conflict, being effectively closed by the end of September this year, reflecting genuine ongoing concern among traders and analysts about the possibility of further disruption spreading beyond just the Strait of Hormuz itself. This detail tells you that the stakes involved in this deployment extend well beyond just the military and diplomatic dimensions we've been discussing. Global energy markets and international shipping industries are actively pricing in the ongoing risk this conflict represents, treating the possibility of continued or expanded disruption as a genuine, quantifiable financial risk rather than a distant, unlikely scenario. Let's talk about what a deployment this large actually signals strategically, because this is really the heart of why the title of today's video describes this as Iran's worst nightmare beginning. And it's worth explaining exactly why that framing is genuinely accurate, rather than just dramatic marketing language. Throughout this entire conflict, Iran's core strategic advantage has always been its ability to use relatively inexpensive asymmetric tactics, small boats, drones, mines, and coastal missile batteries, to threaten and disrupt a much larger, more expensive American naval presence, forcing an unfavorable cost equation where cheap Iranian weapons could threaten enormously expensive American warships. The specific combination of forces currently deployed, 3 carrier strike groups providing overwhelming air power, 10 destroyers providing missile defense and strike capability, and 2 marine assault ships providing additional flexible response options, represents a deliberate American strategy specifically designed to counter exactly that asymmetric advantage through sheer, overwhelming, layered concentration of force. For Iran's regime, watching this level of American naval power position itself directly around the Strait of Hormuz represents a genuinely serious strategic problem, precisely because it removes many of the tactical advantages Iran has relied on throughout this entire conflict. A single carrier strike group, however capable, still represents a finite amount of surveillance and defensive capacity that a sufficiently large or well-coordinated swarm attack might theoretically be able to overwhelm or exploit gaps within. 3 carrier strike groups operating together, combined with the extensive additional surveillance and destroyer support described in this reporting, dramatically closes those potential gaps, providing the kind of redundant, overlapping coverage that makes exactly the kind of swarm and asymmetric tactics Iran has relied on throughout this war significantly harder to execute successfully. This is genuinely the core strategic significance of this deployment, beyond just the raw, impressive scale of the numbers involved. It represents the United States directly and deliberately countering Iran's primary strategic advantage, adjusting its own posture, specifically to close the tactical gaps that had allowed Iran to inflict real, documented damage against American and Allied naval assets throughout the earlier phases of this conflict, including the attacks on the Truxtun, the Rafael Peralta, and the Mason that we've covered in previous videos. Whether this overwhelming concentration of force ultimately succeeds in fully neutralizing Iran's remaining asymmetric capability, or whether Iran continues finding new tactical adaptations specifically designed to challenge even this level of American naval power, remains one of the most important and closely watched questions defining the next phase of this entire conflict. As of the most current reporting available, this deployment remains fully in place and actively engaged in ongoing operations, including the sustained 9 consecutive nights of strikes we discussed earlier, all happening under the protective umbrella and offensive capability this concentrated naval force provides. This isn't a temporary symbolic show of force that's likely to quietly withdraw in the coming days. Based on the deliberate, months-long phased buildup described in earlier reporting from April, this represents a sustained, deliberate American strategic commitment to maintaining overwhelming naval superiority throughout this specific conflict, for as long as it continues. What makes this entire story genuinely worth understanding, beyond just the impressive scale of ships and aircraft involved, is what it reveals about how quickly and how dramatically American military posture in a region can shift when a conflict reaches this level of sustained intensity. 6 months ago, before this war began, this level of concentrated naval power simply didn't exist in this region. Today, according to the most current verified naval tracking data available, 3 full carrier strike groups, 10 destroyers, and 2 marine assault ships are all positioned specifically to counter Iran's continued threat to one of the most economically critical waterways on the entire planet, representing a scale of American naval commitment this region genuinely hasn't seen in over 2 decades. If this breakdown of the current U.S. naval deployment around the Strait of Hormuz was useful to you, let me know in the comments which part of this surprised you most, whether it's the sheer scale of 3 simultaneous carrier strike groups, the specific risks American ships are facing from Iran's remaining coastal defense capability, or just how much this level of deployment is actually costing and risking to keep this critical waterway open. I read every comment, and this community consistently shapes which parts of this ongoing conflict we dig into next. If you found this useful, do me a favor and hit that share button, send it to someone who's been trying to follow the naval side of this war closely, and drop a like so more people get an accurate, sourced look at exactly how much military power the United States currently has positioned in one of the most dangerous waterways in the world right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.